Roboute Guilliman is the only Primarch who ever tried to build something that would outlast its builder. While his brothers conquered and bled, he wrote laws. He drafted the Codex Astartes. He organized, he documented, he planned for a future in which the Emperor and the Primarchs would be gone and the Imperium would still stand. And now, 10,000 years later, he is awake again, and he has seen exactly what his careful, rational Imperium became. A theocracy of corpses and zealots worshipping his father as a god, held together by faith and fear. He hates it. He has said so. But he keeps it running anyway because he understands something his brothers never did. That a lie holding a galaxy together is more dangerous to remove than to maintain. So consider the one question Guilliman is uniquely positioned to answer. He grew up in the Great Crusade. He fought beside his brothers when there were more than 18 of them. He, of all the living, would know what happened to the Second and the 11th. And if Guilliman knows the truth about the lost Primarchs, then his silence is not ignorance. It's a decision. The most reasonable man in the galaxy looked at the truth and decided you can't handle it. Let me say his name properly first because the audience corrects mistakes and this one matters. Roboute Guilliman. Roboute Guilliman. The realm he built before the Imperium ever found him. Ultramar, the 500 worlds, and the word that will haunt this entire story, obliteration. Obliteration. Hold on to that word. We are going to need it. Start with what he was because everything that follows runs on it. Of the 20 sons the Emperor made, Guilliman was the one who thought past the war. The others were weapons. He was an administrator who happened to be a weapon. The records describe him the same way every time. An organizer, a logistician, a man capable of taking the wildest theory and rendering it into working order out of chaos. When the Emperor's agents found the infant capsule on Macragge, the child inside had already been adopted by a consul named Conor, and by the time the Emperor came to reclaim him, Guilliman had built a small, efficient stellar empire of his own. Not conquered, built. That distinction is the whole man, and here is the line that tells you how his mind works. In No Fear, Dan Abnett's account of the Battle of Calth, Guilliman drills it into his Astartes that waging war is not enough, that conquest ends, that battles fade, that the only thing worth the effort is the thing that outlasts you. Civilization, he says, must last forever. Sit with that for a second. Every other Primarch was asking how to win the next war. Guilliman was already asking what survives after all the wars are over. He was the first of the Emperor's sons to plan for a galaxy without the Emperor in it. So when the Great Scouring ended and the Imperium lay in pieces, it was Guilliman who sat down and wrote the Codex Astartes, the book that broke the legions into chapters, defined their structure, their officers, their tactics, everything a space marine would ever need to function. The first part of that book laid out organization, the chapters, their insignia, their officers, their roles. The second part was a collection of strategic and tactical theses meant to guide future leaders who would never meet him, never hear him speak, never know him as anything but a name on a sacred page. Think about what kind of mind writes a manual for people who will live 10,000 years after his death. He didn't write it to win. He wrote it so the thing could run without him. That is not the instinct of a conqueror. That is the instinct of a man who already knows he is mortal and is building the scaffolding to hold up everything he loves after he's gone. And here's the detail that matters for everything that follows. A man who builds institutions to outlive him is a man who thinks constantly about what the future is allowed to know. An institution is, in the end, a decision about which information survives and which information doesn't. The Codex itself is a curated record. It remembers what Guilliman decided was worth remembering and stays silent on the rest. He is, by temperament and by trade, a curator of memory. Keep that in your head, because the most important thing this man ever did may not be a thing he wrote down. It may be a thing he made sure was never written down at all. Now hold that picture of him, the planner, the institution builder, the one who thinks in centuries, and ask the obvious question. What does a man like that do when he learns a truth so dangerous it could bring the whole structure down? Here is what the canon refuses to print plainly. We know exactly what he does, because we've already watched him do it. 10,000 years after he wrote that book, Guilliman woke up. The Imperium pulled him back from the edge of death to save itself, and the first thing the most rational being in the galaxy did was look around at what his careful work had become. He was not pleased. The records of that moment are blunt. "Look what they've made of our dream," he says. "This bloated, rotting carcass of an empire is driven not by reason and hope, but by fear, hate, and ignorance." That is the lawgiver, awake again, looking at 10,000 years of decay with clear eyes. And the worst of it, for him, was the religion. His father, the emperor, had told everyone who would listen that he was no god. He said it over and over. The entire founding idea of the Imperium, the thing called the imperial truth, was that there are no gods, that mankind would advance by reason, not by worship. And Guilliman woke to find his father enthroned as a literal deity, prayed to by trillions, his denial of godhood forgotten, the cathedrals built, the priests in charge. Everything he and the emperor had argued against had become the official faith of the species. Here is where it gets interesting. Watch what he does next. He does not tear it down. He could. He is the most powerful living being in the galaxy, the Lord Commander of the Imperium, the Imperial Regent, second only to the Emperor himself. He has the authority to walk into the great cathedrals and announce the truth, that the man on the golden throne is not a god, was never a god, said so himself. And he does not do it. In Godblight, Guy Haley shows him walking a careful, peculiar line in public, managing the zealots of the Ministorum, holding his tongue, letting the lie stand. He says it privately. He cannot imagine any situation in which his father would be happy with what the Imperium has become. And then he goes back to work running the very theocracy he despises. Why? Because he did the math. An Imperium this fragile, this dependent on faith, would not survive the truth. Pull out the lie and the structure that's resting on it comes down, and 100 billion souls go down with it. So the rational man makes the rational choice. He keeps the lie, not because he believes it, because removing it costs more lives than maintaining it. Remember that, because we are about to apply it to something much larger than a religion. This is the precedent that makes the whole theory work. Guilliman is not a man who tells the truth because the truth is good. He is a man who weighs the truth against its consequences and acts on the result. He has already shown you, in plain canon, that when a lie is load-bearing, when ripping it out would collapse the structure, he will keep that lie running for the rest of his life and carry the contradiction privately and never let it show. He is a proven keeper of necessary secrets, and think about how much that decision actually costs a man like him. Guilliman is not a hypocrite by nature. He is the son who believed in the imperial truth most sincerely of all of them, the one who actually built a society on reason before the emperor ever found him. For him to stand in a cathedral and let the worship continue is not a small thing. It is a daily betrayal of the single idea he organized his entire existence around. He does it anyway. He swallows the contradiction every morning because the arithmetic doesn't change. The faith feeds the war machine. The war machine holds the line, and the line is the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. Take the faith away to satisfy his conscience, and the people he'd be telling the truth to don't live long enough to thank him for it. So he keeps the lie and pays the private cost. That is the man. That is exactly the man. So the question is no longer whether Guilliman would suppress a dangerous truth. We know he does it. We've watched him do it with the biggest lie in the galaxy. The question is only whether he has a bigger one still to keep. And he does. The biggest one in Imperial history. Count them. The Emperor made 20 sons, 20 Primarchs, 20 legions. The whole architecture of the Great Crusade built around that number. And 2 of them, the 2nd and the 11th, are simply gone. Not defeated, not remembered as villains, erased. Their names struck from every record, their banners unmade, their deeds deleted, their very existence reduced to a gap where a name used to be. The Imperium has a formal mechanism for this. It is called an Edict of Obliteration. There is that word again. A damnatio memoriae, High Gothic for the condemnation of memory. And the erasure of the 2nd and the 11th is rated by the Imperium's own historians as the most complete and successful obliteration ever carried out. Whatever was done to them, it was done so thoroughly that 10,000 years later their own surviving brothers will not say their names out loud. Now, line that up against the man we just described, because here is the thing nobody building the standard mystery wants to deal with. Guilliman was there. He was one of the 20. Not a historian reading about them. A brother who stood in the same rooms. The erasure happened during the Great Crusade. The records tell us only 18 legions are referenced by the time the word-bearer's city of Monarchia was razed, which means the 2nd and 11th were already gone at least 4 decades before the heresy even began. That entire window, the discovery of the Primarchs, the assembling of the legions, the campaigns, the loss of 2 of them, Guilliman lived through all of it. He didn't read the file. He was in the file. And we know he remembers because he told a priest. In Dark Imperium, Guy Haley's account of the resurrected Primarch, Guilliman is talking to a chaplain named Frater Matthew, and he says it to the man's face. "I was one of 20, he says. 2 failed. Half the rest turned on my father. The Emperor is not infallible, nor am I." Stop on that. 2 failed. That is the first time in 10,000 years that a Primarch has, in canon, named the lost 2 as a number out loud, and the one who does it is Guilliman. He doesn't say, "I don't know." He doesn't say, "There's a mystery." He says 2 failed, the way a man states a fact he has carried a long time. He knows there were 20. He knows 2 are gone. He has the count. Now, here is where I have to be honest with you because the audience will be honest with me if I'm not. That word, failed, is doing a lot of work, and we should look at it squarely. Some readers argue it's vague on purpose, that Guilliman might be repeating what the Emperor told him rather than describing what he personally witnessed. That failed could be a borrowed word, a thing he was handed, not a thing he saw. The Codex is silent on this point, and the canon does not give us a scene where Guilliman lays out exactly what happened to his brothers. So, I am not going to stand here and tell you there is a confirmed page where Guilliman says, "I know what happened to the 2nd and the 11th, and I am hiding it." That page does not exist. What we have is something quieter, and, I'd argue, more damning. A man who was present, who holds the count, who uses the word failed without flinching, and who then changes the subject. We're not re-arguing whether he was there. We're asking what he did with what he knew.
And here is where the record stops being silence and starts being something else. There is a story, the chamber at the end of memory, that breaks this whole thing open. In it, the sigillite Malcador reveals why no one in the Imperium can remember the Lost Two. It wasn't only that the records were destroyed, the memories were edited. Malcador went into the minds of the surviving Primarchs and suppressed their recollection of their lost brothers, erased everything but the faintest sense that they had ever existed. And he did it at the request of two men, Rogal Dorn and Roboute Guilliman. Read that again.
The memory suppression of the lost Primarchs, the neural obliteration, the editing of the minds of the Emperor's sons, was done because Dorn and Guilliman asked for it. Guilliman is not a bystander to this cover-up. He is one of its architects. He sat with the truth, decided it could not be allowed to stand in the minds of his brothers, and asked the most powerful psyker in the Imperium to reach in and take it out. Whatever happened to the Second and the 11th, Guilliman knew enough about it at the time to want it buried so deep that even Primarchs would forget it existed. And the reason given is the tell. The story makes plain that what happened to those two legions was judged worse than the Horus heresy itself. Dorn, Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian, the most unbending loyalist the Emperor ever made, saw a fragment of the truth, and it frightened him so badly that he was willing to lie, willing to let his own memory be altered rather than carry it intact. These are not men who scare easily. These are not men who lie for convenience. And they looked at the truth about the Second and the 11th and decided, together, that the species was safer not knowing. Does that pattern sound familiar? It should. It is the exact same calculation Guilliman makes every single day about his father's false divinity. A truth too dangerous to keep in the open. A lie kept running because the alternative is collapse. He didn't invent that logic when he woke up in the 41st millennium. He was running it 10,000 years ago, on his own brothers. Here's where it gets stranger, though, and I owe you the other side of it, because this is the part most channels skip. That same story, the one that makes Guilliman an architect of the cover-up, also cuts the other way. Because if Malcador went into the minds of the surviving Primarchs and edited out the memory of the Lost Two, then one of those minds was Guilliman's. The man who asked for the suppression may have asked it of himself. He may hold the fact that something terrible happened, two failed, while the specifics, the actual content of the horror, were taken out of his own head along with everyone else's. He set the trap and may have walked into it on purpose. So we have to hold two things at once, and I'm not going to resolve them for you, because the canon doesn't. On one side, Guilliman was present, holds the count, helped build the cover-up, and has demonstrated for 10,000 years that he keeps load-bearing lies. On the other, his own memory may have been deliberately dimmed by his own request, and the deepest knowledge may rest only with Malcador, who is gone, and the Emperor, who does not speak. The record is contested. That is the honest shape of it. But notice what even the cautious version leaves standing. Even if the specifics were taken out of his head, Guilliman is not the man he was 10,000 years ago, helpless in front of a sealed archive. He is now the Lord Commander of the Imperium and the Imperial Regent. He chairs the Senatorum Imperialis, the Council of the High Lords who govern 1,000,000 worlds. The position of Lord Commander gives him supreme authority over the entire Imperial military. The position of Imperial Regent gives him supreme authority over its civil government on top of that. There is exactly one authority in the galaxy that outranks him, and that authority is a near corpse on a golden chair who has not spoken a clear word in 10,000 years. In every practical sense, Guilliman is the most powerful living being in human history, and his reach into the Imperium's records is total. There is no vault he cannot order opened. There is no file marked expunged that he lacks the standing to demand. And he does not work alone. At his side stands Belisarius Cawl, the Archmagos who has been alive nearly as long as the Imperium itself, who hoards every scrap of lost knowledge, who refuses to discard anything, who rebuilt the gene craft of the Primarchs from the templates up to make a whole new generation of space marines. Think about what that rebuilding required. To engineer those new warriors, Cawl needed the genetic blueprints of the Primarchs, and a man who works with the complete set of templates is a man who has, by simple necessity, handled the genetic ghosts of the two that were erased. So picture the pair of them, working side by side through the Indomitus campaigns. The Primarch who was present when the Legion still numbered 20, and the Archmagos who has spent 10,000 years refusing to let any knowledge die. If there is a being in the galaxy who could help Guilliman reconstruct whatever was taken from his memory, it is Cawl. And Cawl is right there, in his service, every single day.
The Codex is silent on whether they have ever spoken of it. The proximity is not silent at all. So put the pieces on the table. A man who was alive when the legions still numbered 20. A man who holds the count and uses the word failed without hesitation. A man who, by canon, asked for the cover-up to be carved into the minds of his brothers. A man who now commands every archive in the Imperium and works beside the one being old enough to remember the rest. And a man who has shown you, in plain text, that when a truth is too dangerous to release, he keeps it locked and carries the weight in silence. The Codex is silent on what he knows. The behavior is not. Which brings us to the real question, not whether he could know, why he would keep it buried even if he does. And the answer is the same answer as the religion. Think about what this Imperium actually is. It is held together, barely on 1,000 fraying threads, by a handful of load-bearing myths. The myth of a perfect, godlike emperor. The myth of unity. The myth that the Great Crusade was a clean and glorious thing carried out by 20 noble sons. Pull any one of those threads hard enough, and you risk the whole weave coming apart. Now imagine the Imperium learning the truth about the lost two, whatever it is. Imagine the faithful, the trillions who prayed to a perfect emperor, learning that he erased 2 of his own loyal sons so completely that even gods of war forgot them. Or learning that he built something in those 2 legions too terrible to be allowed to exist. Either truth, the loyal sons cut out, or the weapon too dangerous to name, is a hammer aimed straight at the foundation. And Guilliman is the man holding the building up. He tolerates the ecclesiarchy for exactly this reason. He lets trillions worship a god he knows is a man, because the worship is load-bearing, and he cannot afford to remove it. The lost Primarchs are the same shape of problem, only larger. The religion is a lie that keeps the present standing. The truth about his brothers is a lie that keeps the past intact, and the past is where the Imperium gets its right to exist. Tell the species that the founding was built on an atrocity, and you don't just shake their faith. You take away the story they march under. So he does what he always does. He weighs the truth against the bodies it would cost, and he keeps it locked, and he goes back to work. And here's where the canon hands us the chilling part for free. We don't have to guess at how severe this truth is, because the people who saw it already told us, in the only language that matters from men like them, their reaction. When a fragment of what happened to the Lost Two was shown to Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, the most stubborn, most duty-bound, most unbreakable loyalist the Emperor ever forged, it frightened him so badly that he chose to lie. He chose to have his own memory edited rather than carry the truth intact. Understand what a measure that is. This is a being who stood on the walls of the imperial palace and held them against the armies of his traitor brother. And the truth about the second and the 11th was, by his own judgment, worse than that, worse than the heresy, worse than watching his family turn on his father, a horror that the Praetorian of Terra decided he would rather forget than know. Now ask yourself what kind of secret clears that bar, and then ask yourself whether the most rational being in the galaxy, looking at the same truth, would arrive at any different conclusion than the one Dorn did. He wouldn't. He didn't. He helped Dorn make exactly that choice in the first place. So when people say Guilliman might simply tell the Imperium the truth now that he's awake, they are imagining a different man than the one in the books. The man in the books already faced this exact decision once, with the same information, and chose silence so total he had it carved out of his own brother's skulls. People don't reverse the defining choice of their lives because 10,000 years went by. They double down on it. The silence isn't weakening with him awake. It's getting a guardian. Now sit for a moment with what that costs him, because this is the part the standard mystery never touches. We talk about the lost Primarchs as an archive problem, a puzzle, a gap in a record. For Guilliman, it is not a record. It is his brothers. He stood beside them. He fought in the same crusade, and he has chosen, assuming the thesis holds, to carry the truth of what became of them entirely alone, presenting calm to the galaxy, while the loss sits in him with no one to share it. He is not a cynic. He is not a man who enjoys secrets. The records make him almost painfully sincere, a man who genuinely grieves what the Imperium has become. And if he knows what happened to the second and the 11th, then every day he stands in front of the Senatorum and runs the government, he is doing it while holding the loneliest secret a person can hold. The truth about your own family, that you have decided no one else gets to know, because knowing it would break them. That is the difference between this and a simple cover-up. A politician hides a thing to protect his position. Guilliman, if he hides this, hides it to protect everyone else from a weight he has decided only he is strong enough to carry. There is no one above him to confess to. The Emperor cannot answer. Malcador is gone. His brothers either turned traitor or had the memory cut out of them. He is, in the most literal sense, the last man standing who might know, which means there is no one left to share the burden with even if he wanted to. He doesn't get to put it down. He just gets to keep working with it inside him. And remember who this is. This is the brother who, more than any of them, tried to keep the family whole. After the heresy, when the surviving Primarchs scattered to the corners of the galaxy, it was Guilliman who sent emissaries to track them down. Dorn, Russ, the Khan, the Lion, Vulcan, the one who refused to let the Brotherhood simply dissolve into grief and silence. He was the one who wanted his brothers found. So imagine that same man, awake again 10,000 years later, holding the knowledge that two of those brothers were lost in a way so terrible it had to be cut out of everyone's mind to keep the species standing. The man who spent his life trying to gather the family back together is the same man now standing guard over the one piece of it that can never be allowed back. He went looking for his lost brothers once. Now he is the reason two of them stay lost. That is not a contradiction. That is the cruelest possible consistency. He gathers what can survive being remembered, and he buries what cannot. And he does both for exactly the same reason: to keep something standing. There is a moment in Dark Imperium that I keep coming back to. He says it to a priest, almost carelessly, as a provocation. Two failed. And then he moves on. like a man flicking past a wound he has long since stopped letting himself look at directly. That casualness is the loudest thing in the scene. You do not get casual about a thing you don't know. You get casual about a thing you have spent 10,000 years learning to live beside. The lightness in his voice is not ignorance. It is the calm of a man who decided the answer a very long time ago and has been carrying it quietly ever since. And that reframes everything. Because for 10,000 years we have talked about the lost Primarchs as a mystery the Imperium lost, as if the answer fell into the warp and was simply never recovered, as if it's gone. But the entire premise of this story is that the answer didn't go anywhere. The answer is alive. The answer walks the halls of the Imperial Palace. The answer runs the government. We keep searching the gutted archives and the redacted files for a truth that may be standing in the throne room, wearing the face of the most rational being in the galaxy, choosing every single day not to say it. The Imperium has been hiding the answer for 10,000 years, and for most of that time, the hiding was easy, because everyone who knew was dead or edited. But now one of them is awake. The one who helped build the silence in the first place is back, holding the keys to every vault, working beside the one mind old enough to fill in the rest. If he wanted the truth out, it could be out. It is not out. That is not an accident of history anymore. With him awake, it is a choice. His choice, made fresh. Every day he says nothing. So here is the reframe, and then I'll let you sit with it. We have always treated the lost Primarchs as a gap in the record, a thing the Imperium forgot. But a gap is passive. A gap is something that happens to you. What we may actually be looking at is not a gap at all. It is a decision, an ongoing, deliberate, daily decision made by the one man with both the knowledge and the power to reverse it, who has weighed the truth against the cost and chosen the cost every time. He didn't lose the answer about his brothers. He decided you couldn't live with it, and then he went back to work. We keep calling the lost Primarchs a mystery, as if the answer fell into the warp and was never seen again. But there is a man alive right now who grew up among the Emperor's sons when there were still 20 of them, who remembers the Great Crusade with a clarity none of us can imagine, and who now holds the keys to every archive in the Imperium. Roboute Guilliman knows. Of course he knows. And he has looked at his shattered, superstitious, blood-soaked Imperium, weighed what the truth about his erased brothers would do to it, and made the same choice he makes every day about his father's false divinity. He decided the lie keeps more people alive than the truth would. The most rational being in the galaxy read the answer and locked it away. Not because he forgot his brothers, because he remembered exactly what they were,